Welcome to Inside the Memorial as we look across the War Memorial, its campus, its community, and the region to talk with interesting people about interesting things. My name's Maria Miller. I'm your host today. I'm president and CEO of the War Memorial, and we are joined by our producer, Brett Pulte. I'm getting that in right in the beginning because I forget to give kudos to Brett. So thank you, Brett, for running the show here. I'm excited about our guest today, Lisa Lark. Lisa, you are a former high school teacher, English teacher, college composition instructor, but most recently a published author. And you're currently working on a project for the War Memorial. So I'm excited to kind of dig into that and talk about that project. And it really has a serious tone in terms of, what the project is, very respectfully that you handle documenting and kind of publishing stories on those killed in action. And so, welcome. We're
Thank
happy to
you.
have you
Thank you
here.
so much for having me. I really appreciate having this opportunity to talk a little bit more about my work here with the War Memorial and some of the other work that I've done in the past on this
All
topic.
right. All right. Well, let's dig in. First off, tell us a little bit about yourself. Anything you
Absolutely.
pick it off at.
As you said, I taught high school English for 9 years in the Dearborn Public Schools. I also have a background in corporate communications. So I do storytelling, writing, public relations, that sort of thing. But while I was teaching, I started working on telling the stories of the men and women who have given their lives in service to the United States. And for about the last 15 years, on and off, I've been researching and writing and speaking and just raising awareness as much as I can about, who these people were and how much they gave and that their families gave to this country to get us to where we are today.
All right. 15 years of
Yep. I
storytelling.
started in 2010 when I was teaching.
Oh my goodness. And so you taught in Dearborn,
Yes.
correct?
Yes,
Okay.
I did.
And it all kind of started there. So
It
how
did.
did you like
It
haphazardly
did.
fall into
So I have always had a significant amount of respect for the military. My dad's a Marine. He served from 1966 to 1969. And so every year we, growing up in Dearborn, would go to the Dearborn Memorial Day Parade. I loved history, I always have. And so it was always sort of something that I had respect for. When I was teaching the high school where I taught, Edsel Ford High School in Dearborn, they had a Memorial Day ceremony every year that honored the 23 young men from Etzel who died during Vietnam. And after one of those ceremonies, the student was asking me a question for a little bit more information about one of the people that had been mentioned. And I realized that there was not any readily available. There was a lot of great information at the Dearborn Historical Museum. There was some in the yearbooks and in old newspapers, but there wasn't really anything available that I could have answered that question with. And so that was the impetus. And I just started gathering gathering details at that point, and the goal was just to kind of put together a little bit more information to go with that ceremony, and then it just sort of continued to grow and grow and grow over the last 15
Oh
years.
my goodness. So, most recently, working with us, and I'm so excited about this project. So, can you talk to us a little bit about where you're at with that? As
Absolutely.
I know we're trying to get, well, hopefully, listeners to call in or reach out.
Yeah, absolutely. So started the genesis of this program is understanding the history of the War Memorial and the Alger family and the commitment to veterans and to the fallen that the War Memorial has always had. Taking it to this next level with storytelling and really bringing the names on the plaques to life
right.
and giving them some history and understanding who they were. I believe it's just such a valuable tool, not only for the War Memorial itself, but for the community. These were your friends, your sons, your brothers, husbands. And over the course of Grosse Pointe's history, we've identified so far 178 people with Grosse Pointe ties to the community that have given their lives in service. And this is just simply about telling those stories, tracking down information so that when people come here or when students go to the website, genealogists looking to build their family history out, they're not only seeing the name, but they might see a photo. They might hear anecdotes from people who knew them. They'll certainly hear about their service record and things that they did while they were in the military.
I'm excited about what that book is going to look like, and, listeners can't see this, but anybody who may be viewing, this is the book that Lisa did for, Dearborn,
Yes.
and how many were in here?
347 are
Wow,
in that
wow,
one.
and it is just so artfully done because you have I mean, there might be what you could say, obituaries
Mhm.
potentially, but there's also, a story on any given, service member, and
And what we
it's
did with that is if you notice the biographies are all roughly the same length, so we honored them equally across the board. Some of the 347 would have enough to fill volumes of a book with just their story based
right.
on what we were able to find. And a lot of that was the family's preserved letters and things like that. But there are some that we only had one or two lines for. But we really wanted with that book to make it equal. And this book was designed to be a resource for the libraries and the historical museums. There is an additional layer of information for every one of those 347. I have anywhere between 5 primary sources up to 70 or 80 primary sources about these people, and the city of Dearborn now has access to those in their museum as well. So that again, if someone were to contact and say, "I think my uncle was from Dearborn and he died in World War II," they will be able to learn as much as they can about him. And that's my commitment is to not only writing the stories, but is to also, and we'll do this with the War Memorial as well, is that anything I find will eventually go to the War Memorial and the library and the Historical Society because the goal of this is to put the information out in the world.
Mhm.
Um, there's amazing information out there, but if you don't have the background in research, particularly military research that I have, it can be very difficult to find.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's about making it so that it can be accessible.
Well, and I think about that because our book are we starting with the Civil War?
Yes, there are two that I've identified from the Civil War.
And all the way up to
All the way up to, Iraq and Afghanistan. I believe the most recent date is 2016, so it would go approximately from 1863 to 2016.
and the, criteria is born in, residence was at time of
I think what we've kind of settled on and is very typically, spent a chunk of time, in the Grosse Pointes. We began with the names that were on the plaques already. So World
right,
War II, Korea, Vietnam already had plaques.
right.
So we started with those names and then added in the Iraq and Afghanistan, then went backwards to look at World War One, which strangely I have not identified any, from World War One,
That is interesting.
and then, the 2 from the Civil War, and then there are a handful, I think 3 that are peacetime, which means that they had been serving in the military either as a career or had just returned from military service, but they happened to pass away while on active duty, but just not during a conflict.
Okay. Okay.
And the other qualification is simply, dying well in service. So
Mhm.
that includes not only killed in action or people who died of wounds received in action. That includes there are some who die in training accidents. There are some that who die, in automotive accidents or of diseases while they're serving, but maybe they just were not in the war zone
Mhm.
itself. So in my work, I don't delineate between, combat death and maybe a disease death on the home front because in my mind, when you join the military, when you're in the military, you are not in control of where you go
Right.
or what happens to you. So I choose to honor all of the deaths in service, which is
Yep.
how we got to the 178.
I gotcha. That's a really good distinction, and I think
Mhm.
that's important to know.
And there are some on this list that did pass away, at home. Some of them, received wounds and came home to heal and then passed away here. There are some that were, lifers in the military and perhaps died in a vehicle accident. And so we include those as well because it was all, died well in service to the United States.
And I think about the, history of the War Memorial,
Hmm.
right? And it's just got such a rich history. It wouldn't have happened without really the Civil War hero,
Hmm.
General Russell Elger Sr. And, later he ended up making a name for himself once he entered as just, I think, a private,
Hmm.
ended up as a general, very distinguished, ultimately made a career in the lumber industry, and his son took on his business acumen,
Hmm.
lived in this house, this beautiful estate. Big old story around that, but then the grandson was born in the home, and the
Absolutely.
grandson killed in World War II, and
Hmm.
yeah, the Battle
and
of
and
Net.
and that's I think one of the things that the Grosse Pointes share with Dearborn is that legacy of family.
Mhm.
You have not only the beautiful history of the Alger family, but you also have long-standing families that have been in this community for a very, very long time and have made such a significant impact, not just on the Grosse Pointes, but on the Detroit area as a whole. Not being from the Grosse Pointes. I drove through a lot. My mom grew and her family grew up in St. Clair Shores, so we would always go down Lake Shore
Mm.
and Jefferson on the way home. But the names are recognizable. There's a Rivard on the list. There's a Van Dyke on the list. So it's just is a representation of the impact that the Grosse Pointes have had on Metro Detroit through the years.
So what about other communities?
Mhm.
So you've done Dearborn, we're working on Grosse Pointe. Have
Mhm.
you hit up anybody else yet?
I'm currently working on a project that is simply mine. There's nothing formal yet. When I was working on Dearborn, not only with Dearborn, but on Grosse Pointes as well, there's obviously a lot of crossover with the city of Detroit. Um,
Right.
when a person enlists in the military, a lot of time their military records are correlated by where they enlisted. So some of them might be marked as being from Detroit, but actually from Dearborn or from Warren or from the Grosse Pointes or from Redford, those surrounding sort of inner ring suburbs. So researching the Dearborn book and now with the Grosse Pointes, you have to go through all of the Detroit people to make sure that they did not live somewhere else. Um, and in doing that, I discovered that there is no one record, one list of Detroiters who died in military service. That's in chunks at churches, at schools, but there is no city list. And so I just decided someone's got to build the list. So I decided to do it.
Wow.
I think I underestimated the size of it, but that list is about 5,786 right
Wow.
now.
Wow.
But that is still very new. That's more in the process of just identifying that I have the right people. But like I said, there's a lot of crossover. Um, with these cities. So I was knee deep in the city anyway and in the county anyway. So I just thought, let's formalize it so that 100 years from now, no one else has to do it.
Okay. So after you do that, you're gonna do the whole state.
Why not? Why not? Go big or go home, right?
Well, you'll have the bulk of it done,
Yeah.
I'm
At
sure.
that point, yeah, it's pretty much I'll hit Grand Rapids and Lansing, and then it'll be 2/3 of the way done. So
Well, I'm curious, how did you get the word out for Dearborn? I know what we're doing here, and so how long did you take
well, the
to
Dearborn
get the
project was a
stories down?
little bit different because it happened over the course of probably 10 years. I started with the 23 from Etzel Ford in Vietnam, and then the city heard about the project. They happened to be doing their Memorial Day parade, which is, I believe, the oldest in the state, was honoring Vietnam that year. So then I went from those 23 to the 68 or 69 from Vietnam in Dearborn. Then from there, I was connected with the group that runs the wall in DC, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, and I worked with them in 2012 to do a book for their 30th anniversary. And so then the projects have just sort of rolled from one to the next. But to pull the stories together for the Dearborn book, it took me about 2.5 years,
Mm.
but it wasn't a full time push. It was, I was still working, and it was just more of a gathering around Memorial Day and Veterans Day. I would put it on my Facebook and ask around and try to find as much as I could.
Right.
So very similar to what we're doing here, just stretched out a little bit more.
That was stretch out because
Yes.
we're kind of condensed. So is it feasible to really? We were looking to have this released um, soon.
It's all when we do a project like this, what's so exciting to me is that I don't know what's out there until we hear what's out there, right? My research process begins with things like ancestry.com or newspapers.com, where I just simply type in the names that we have on the list and then start building out information of what branch of service they were in, um, where they went to high school, where they lived, their street addresses, family names, and just sort of create a big pile of information on each person. And then when it comes time to write, creating a narrative. Um, I think this book will be a little bit longer than the Dearborn one because it's about half as many people.
Hmm.
But the real crux of what I try to do does come from the recollections of people who knew them. So family members, friends, people who went to school with them, people who may have worked with them. Obviously that's easier with some of the more modern conflicts, but there are also stories that have been passed down through families. I think with people that had passed during World War II in particular, a lot of the recollections I got from the Dearborn community were this was my grandmother's brother, and we didn't know much about him, but here's a photo that was always on grandma's mantle, or here's a story that has been passed down through the years. And it might not seem like much, but when it's put in the context of all of the other items that I have, it really does help to build out those stories and create a picture of them as an individual and not just someone who died in war.
Right, right.
And so it's definitely feasible, but I think, as I've gone so far, I'm really excited to start hearing from the community members. I know these people left an imprint on the people within the Grosse Pointe community, so I'm really eager to start hearing from those who knew these
Oh my
178.
goodness, absolutely. It doesn't seem like, a tall order to ask
No.
for people to, yeah, there's
And
178 people, come on and
I'm
share your stories with us.
flexible, right? I can do anything. I'll drive to your house and scan it for you so that, the photo never has to leave your home. I have portable scanners. I talk on the phone. I can send you email questions. I've been doing this for 15 years.
Wow.
I've interviewed more than probably 500 families, I would think, and probably over 1,000 veterans. And it's the details that bring these people to life. And I think one of my very favorite songs is by a band from Virginia called Carbon Leaf, and they have a song called "The War Was in Color." And that's such a touchstone to me because when you look particularly at World War I, World War II, the Civil War, if we have photographs, they're always in black and white.
Right,
But they were not in black
right.
and white. They
Isn't
lived
that
their lives in
country
color.
song?
It's just no, it's a little bit more marchy to it.
Okay.
I'll send you a link for it, but it's very beautiful, and it's truly about, when we think back from a perspective of a historian, these were individual people, and
Mhm.
every name on every war, whether it's just a casualty list on the news, we do become a little bit desensitized because if you don't know the person,
Absolutely.
it's becomes very numeric. And I think that's what I loved about, the genesis of this, at Etzel Ford was that it truly is we're telling stories about these 23 people.
Right.
And, it makes an impact on the students as well because for the students today, and I still speak at this ceremony every year, the Vietnam War ended 50 years ago.
Mhm.
So at the most recent, the last name that we talk about, the most recent name is from 1972. So you're talking about 53 years. They have no connection to that
No.
person. However, knowing what sport they played on the same football field, or knowing what street they lived on, or what grocery store they worked at, that brings the
Mhm.
person to life in a way that just saying X number of people died at Guadalcanal is not going to resonate as well as learning about Henry
Right.
and
Right.
how he got to Guadalcanal and what his family life was like. And that to me is why I do this, is because each name, these tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Americans who have given their lives deserve to have that story told in some way at some point. I'm not going to be able to do all hundreds of thousands of them, uh, but I can certainly do as much as I can.
It's amazing. It is the storytelling, and the song I'm thinking of, it is a country song, but it's something along the line. You should have seen it in color,
Mhm.
and it's like if you, thought that was something, and he tells a story, and it's a
Same mindset.
yeah, and it's the same thing, and yeah, every time I hear it, it
Mhm.
just gets me because it's like, wow, yeah, you see these black and white photos,
Absolutely.
and he's reliving it.
Mhm.
Um,
And then it has value. I mean, and even looking at this exhibit that you have here with all of the pieces of ephemera and photographs and stuff from Vietnam, it adds a layer of reality to it.
yeah,
And so that's my whole goal, is if I can add a layer of reality to it. Um, or worst case scenario, I can put all of it in one place so that some down the line, maybe decades ahead, they want to do another exhibit about World War II. They won't have just things that are from a more general collection. They'll be able to have things that are from Grosse Pointers
right,
who
right.
lived here and who worked here and who went to school here.
Yeah, and that's what thank you for bringing up the exhibit here. We're sitting in the gallery down outside of the old theater, and Karen Pope and her team at the Grosse Pointe Artists Association have really assembled a meaningful exhibit down here that's worth checking out. And in commemoration of the end of the 50th anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War. There's a lot of really and I come down and I've seen it all, working here obviously, but I'll still come down and kinda look at some of the things. So right behind you are the rations and,
Mhm.
um, yeah.
I think
It's
that's
impactful.
another great point of going into the research with this depth is that, the more information that you pull together, you can add elements to it in terms of, okay, it's one thing to say that they were in the Army or they were in the Army Air Force, but you can then narrow down, were they in England? Were they on the European
Mhm.
front? Were they on the Pacific front? And even if I don't gain anything other than I know that they were on the Pacific front, that itself tells a story because it was so different than the European front. So even small pieces like that can be really beneficial.
Right. So I'm excited you helped me personally with some information from my dad who served in World War II. And he's deceased for a long, long time, but not really understanding. It was in the Navy. And so I sent away for
Oh, you did
information.
good.
I have nothing yet. So I
No,
don't,
it typically will take between 4 to 6 weeks, generally speaking, to
it's,
get.
yeah,
It's
it's
a
probably going
process.
to take a little longer than
Yeah,
that. So something tells me, yeah.
it's a process. And that's the other thing is that other than having a specialized skill of being able to read them and know what some of the symbols and the terms mean, anyone who served in the military has the ability to, through the Freedom of Information Act, to request their military records and or the military records of family members. And that can include anything from, their enlistment photograph and just a list of places they served. It could be as deep as, their records of when they took a marksmanship test or, their full list of ships that they boarded. And that's all available. It's just a lot of people, a lot of families don't know how to access it, and I do. And so that's one of the things that I also really am privileged to be able to do is to help someone like you learn a little bit more.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you were able to find 2 ships that he was on, and that's in the draft card, I believe.
Yep.
Um, so I don't know what more they'll find.
We don't know. I mean, and that's the thing is that this is all done by people.
Right,
So
right.
the whole process began with someone, your father or the person at their draft board, writing down the information about him. And here we are 80 years later, finding that on a website. A complete stranger just types in a few words and it's available. And that's how I build a story is I simply will take all those different pieces of information and look at them. And there's something to say, you know, he was this tall, he weighed this many pounds, this hair color, eye color. But then you can get into, expanding the research further. And some of them are mentioned in books because a lot of survivors of the military have written books about their unit or about a particular battle. And we find mentions of people in those books. There was one recently I discovered a couple days ago that was mentioned in a book, and it was described him as there was no one more up for adventure than this person. And that's one
Mhm,
sentence.
mhm.
But now, even if I don't use that sentence in the book, I have a perspective on who the individual was that kind of directs me a little bit more into telling the
Right.
person's story.
Do you have, any particular story that stands out,
Oh, there's
be
so
it
many.
even kind of, lighthearted,
For
or
you here or for just in general?
in general? Yeah.
In general, yeah, there's a few. I mean, I think the ones that always get to me coming from a high school perspective are the ones of the younger,
Oh,
17,
sure.
18-year-old young men. But there was a man that lost his life during Vietnam named Michael Troyan, and I've since been able to, become close with his family. I've spoken with his sister many, many times for the various projects. But she was shared with me a photo of they sent Mike for his birthday. They sent a like a birthday cake mix. And so there's a photo. They weren't obviously able to bake the cake, but there's a photo of Michael eating essentially a pan of frosting and he's sort of squatted down and just shoveling, the frosting and he's got cake all over his face. And it's, here he was in his early 20s doing this amazingly difficult job in this other part of the world that he had no real reference for. And he looks like a little kid.
You think
He looks like a little kid eating the chocolate
and you
from
get you
his
get that
face.
cake, right?
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I think
one-year-old
that
son.
one's actually in there somewhere, but,
Wonderful one.
and to me, it's just very moving, one, to learn about these people. They are primarily men, but there's one woman, in Dearborn, and I've worked with or written about several other women, but it is predominantly men, and being able to take away that layer of being a Marine, being a sailor, being a soldier, and see them as individuals is very powerful for me because it just truly is. They were so young, they were so young. And, particularly World War II and into Korea and Vietnam, these were not typically people that traveled much. The ones that I've written about, they, in many cases, did not leave the state of Michigan until they were in Southeast Asia or until they were in France or Germany. It certainly didn't leave the United States until then, until after they trained and went to war. And
Mhm.
certainly without the internet, with all that sort of things, they would have known very little about where they were going and what the weather looked like and what the climate was and what the terrain looked like. And that to me is just this sense of how did they do that? How did they find the inner strength to not only do the war fighting and the work of war, but to just be willing to go. It's
Right,
just such a
right,
powerful,
right.
powerful story.
I'm thinking as you're going through and sharing all of that with me, because that can be really heavy. How do you keep it? How do you stay lighthearted?
Some days it's easier than others. I always go back to one of the very first conversations I had. So as I mentioned, Dearborn's still a very small town, bigger population, but very small town. And so when I started looking at the list to try and find back in 2010 some more information, the only thing that I could find was from a Dearborn historian, so like their historical society's newsletter from the 70s. Someone had a copy of that, and it listed alphabetically all of the people from Dearborn who had died during the Vietnam War. And I started looking at it and saying like, okay, if I wanted to really do this, I'm going to have to talk to the people who knew them. So let's take a look and see if I can find any families. And the first name alphabetically was Anderson, and I was like, nope, that's going to be too common of a name. I'm not going to try and research Anderson because I'm going to get dozens of them. And the second young man's name was David Antal, and I thought, okay, that's unusual enough. And he went to Etzel, so he was the first one I really looked up from Etzel. And in during Vietnam, World War II, and Korea, you would typically see in an obituary or in a mention in the local paper would list the address, list the parents' names and then their address. So I had David's address, and so I went to the phone book because it was 2010, and I looked up that last name, and his mother was still living at the exact same address, and she was still alive, and so I started with her. And when it does get heavy, I go back to that conversation that I had with his mother, Anna, and she was just totally overwhelmed by the fact not only was his name on a memorial in the school, which she did not know. She did not know that there was a ceremony that he was mentioned in, and she certainly did not know that there was some English teacher wanting her to tell stories about her son. And she was so moved by it, and it was just such a powerful moment that when I do get overwhelmed by some of this information, because you're right, it is
Mhm.
a lot, um, that I just really try to think about her and about Mary Troyan, who were the ones that lost these people, and how much it means to them that people like us are still willing to do this. Not just me researching and writing, but the War Memorial being willing to let me
Right,
do it,
right.
is very powerful. And so that's what I tend to go back to.
It's doing something for someone else.
Mhm, mhm.
It is amazing work.
And Mary Troyan is still alive, but Anna Antal has since passed away, and she lived to be in her 90s, and never there was never a day that she did not miss her son and think about her son.
Oh my gosh, I couldn't imagine.
And it's a privilege for me to be able to take that information and do something with it that's going to be the benefit of a larger group of people. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that I've read and I've learned that, it's entirely possible that no one else knows them. I
Mhm.
mean, I have had people who served, particularly with the Vietnam fallen, that have shared things with me about circumstances of death and have prefaced it with, "This can't go anywhere near your book, but I need to put it out there." And so I have taken on stories that I will never share with anybody else, and that's part of the honor and privilege that I have to take that. And if that made that person's life a little bit better, that someone else in the world knew what
Right,
they had seen, then that's
right.
I'm more than willing
Oh my
it's
gosh.
my act of service. I did not have the capacity to join the military myself, so this is how I pay it.
And did you see yourself in
No.
the in the
Not at the time that I was young enough, perhaps. I think by the time that I got to be I would have thought about that as a career. My age and my kneecaps would have prevented that from happening.
because you're not a history teacher, you were an English
I
teacher.
History was my minor.
Was
I
your
taught
mind?
history.
Oh,
I
okay.
taught history for 2 years, but my passion was always more in English at the
So
time.
so you are using
I'm using both.
You're using both,
And then
so
the
you're doing it.
communications as well. I mean, like I said, I've had the privilege to talk to a lot of really fascinating people. I've interviewed families all over the country, um, every branch of service, every religion you can think of, people who were immigrants, came to this country, became naturalized, and then died in service to the country. One of the men that's in the Vietnam Wall book was actually born in a internment camp in California, and then gave his life in Vietnam.
Oh my
And
god.
that's American history, right? I mean, not just him in his service, but
Right.
that segment of time to go from that in the 40s to that in the 60s is profound.
Wow.
And to me, that's if I only did it just to read those stories and learn about them, it just I mean, this country is such an amazing place filled with so many people who have sacrificed so much, that it just is a privilege to be a part of
Wow.
this home.
I could see this continuing to roll on as you get into the city of Detroit. And
Mhm.
like I said, you're going to be doing the state. And then pretty soon there's going to be other states that are going to call you. And they're
That would be my dream, right? It's like I said, I it sounds sort of corny and cheesy, but it truly is. It's an honor to
to have
have
to
this
do that.
information and to be able to share it with people. Even if you don't get anything from the National Archives about your father, you've probably never seen his draft card, and that to me is
Right.
huge.
Right.
It's something different. And there's so much amazing information that's tucked into these
Hmm.
documents because a World War II draft card contains not only height, weight, physical appearance, but it also contains, where they were working at the time of the draft card. And, that can then always lead me to another step because over the course of 15 years, I've built a pretty significant stack of things, right? And so um, if the draft card mentions that they worked at Hudson's, for example, I know that Hudson has had a memorial plaque that was in their building for a long time. So that might lead me there, which would then lead me someplace else, which would then connect the dots for something.
Right.
So, and that's why it's so important for the community to reach out, even if they don't think they know much. It might just be, I think this person lived on this street. I might not have the street. Even if they're not exactly right, it gets me closer to where I had before,
Right. Right.
and that's what I talk to, a lot of the communities about is that I will you will be surprised what can open a door
Hmm.
that then gets me the entire story. Nicknames are huge. You might not remember much about someone you went to school with who passed away in Vietnam, but if you know that they went by a nickname specifically, a lot of the things that have been written by survivors of the battles will use nicknames. So I might be searching for someone named Gary Smith, which is a very common name. But if he went by, Bud or
Right.
Buddy or Chip, that might then narrow that down so that I can
Right. Right.
find something a little bit.
They probably all had nicknames.
I'm sure they did. I'm sure they did. I'm sure some of them probably would not want them printed, 75 years later. But yeah, so every little bit helps. And, in working with community members is truly one of my favorite pieces because I learned so much about Grosse Pointe as a community,
Right.
which is going to be different for me because Dearborn was so much in my blood having grown up there and taught
Hmm.
there. There wasn't much that could surprise me, but this is, I've learned a lot about the streets and the different neighborhoods and the schools and the churches and all the things that make up their
I
Grosse
love
Pointe.
it.
So,
How many stories do you have? Some
oh, I haven't
you
started
receive
writing any stories yet. Um,
people haven't reached out as of yet.
no, but I have information for all of them with the exception there's about 6 or 7 people that I have virtually nothing but their name.
Okay.
And what conflict they were in. And that might be something as simple as, time is different. Time passes. There might be a name misspelling.
Mm.
For example, one of the names on the World War II plaque, I believe, is Peter Robinson. That should have been Peter Robertson, I believe, because there is no record of a Peter Robinson from Grosse Pointe dying in World War II. But I found multiple records for Peter Robertson from Grosse Pointe dying in World War II.
Yeah.
So it might just be something that I can't find anything just yet because the name was spelled wrong on the original plaque.
Right.
Or it might be, there are always more records of someone who died in combat than there are for someone who died stateside.
Hmm.
So it might be that that person never went overseas. And so I have to kind of go through and it's a lot harder to find. And some of them just have very frustratingly common names that make it difficult to dig through the weeds, as it were.
As they didn't put the nicknames in the obituary.
Or they,
So,
only mentioned that they were there. And so then that might be the case where we have a handful where we're not able to get much from, which will be unfortunate. But hopefully the community recognizes one of the names and can say, "Hey, no, that is spelled wrong," and he was in
I
this
would love to,
branch of
yeah, I would
service. For
love to know
example,
that.
the one I'm thinking of specifically is on the Vietnam plaque, and his name is Thomas Alvarez. And I have found nothing in any of my, in the Grosse Pointe papers, the Detroit papers, in the military database
Mhm.
that I use on Ancestry. It's not spelled the typical way of Alvarez. It's spelled
Mhm.
Alver, and you typically see Alva with an A. So I don't know if that's incorrect. I've tried it both ways, but then Thomas Alvarez is not an uncommon name. So then I get into,
Boy.
then you also get into things with community memorials. Michigan might not be the last place that he lived. So, for example, if any of these people spent their childhood in Grosse Pointe and Grosse Pointe wanted to honor them on the plaque, which they should be, they might be listed as being from Delaware or
Mhm.
from New York. So, while my research is looking for a Thomas Alvarez who died between 1965 and 1975 from Michigan, if he's classified in a different state.
And I wonder if any of our archived materials up in the attic, how these names even get on the get on
I
our plaque. So that would
would
be something
love
we
to
could.
spend some time in the attic. I love an attic.
We'll bring you up in
I
the attic.
attic. Whenever I work with different organizations, they typically will say, "Well, we'll pull some stuff out." No, nope. Just let me
Let
in
me
there
go in there.
dig
Oh,
because
the attic's a special place here
things
at
are
the War Memorial.
things are where you least expect it, and then that's especially important. That's why it's so important for the community because with these 6 or 7 names, I'm very limited to. I have to know if they live somewhere else. So
Right.
if it's something as simple as say, "Hey, I went to middle school to Thomas Alvarez, but he moved in the 8th grade," that's a start because
Mhm.
then I can stop looking after the 8th grade and start, you know, surrounding states, surrounding countries and such. But
All right, we'll
that's the
get you.
value.
We'll figure this out. We'll
That's the
get you
value. Thank you.
yeah.
And there's some from all of the wars and but it's just truly it's a passion for me, but also I do enjoy the puzzle aspect of it. There are times where I will fist pump and just be like, "Yes, I got him." Because now I have opened a door that I can then barrel through like the Kool-Aid man and find the full story.
She's the Kool-Aid girl.
Absolutely.
Do you have time to read? Do you have time to do other
I do.
things?
I do. I tend to read at night to sort of turn my brain off.
We got all right. What are your top 3 books that you would recommend to
My first
anybody?
one is actually right over there
That's over
in
here.
display.
All
That's
right.
Tim O'Brien's "The Things They Carried,"
The Things They Carried.
and that is
Okay.
that is a book that I reread a couple times. Every couple years, I'll reread it. It's O'Brien served in Vietnam. It is a fiction book, but there's elements of truth to it, and I think that that's what makes it so beautiful. Is that you know the concept of war itself is filled with so many things that don't seem possible to those of us that haven't experienced it. And one of the early veterans that I spoke with, had given me that exact caution that you're going to hear some things that just sound absolutely out there, and there's no possible way that they could have been true. They were absolutely true, and they're probably leaving something out. And so, what O'Brien does really well with his book is he kind of brings those elements together. But I think the other reason that I love the book is it's truly very similar to what I do. It's about them as people and not
Mhm.
as
Mhm.
soldiers or
Mhm.
Marines or sailors or Coast Guardsmen or pilots or anything like that. And then I also love, sticking on the history topic, I love Kevin Boyle's Arc of Justice, which is about the Dr. Ossian Sweet trial in
Mm.
Detroit. That's one I've read a couple times as well. So generally stick to the nonfiction stuff.
Yeah,
Um,
right, right.
I think I spent a lot of time with fiction when I was teaching, and so now I like to relax with, not surprisingly, a book about war. So
Not
not
surprising at all. You do not get away
absolutely,
from it. Well, and you got the history inside of you, so
absolutely,
that's who you are.
absolutely.
So, how do people connect with being able to share their
Yeah.
stories?
So I think next is continuing to build out this project, right? We are on a timeline, and I really, would love to hear from community members. I know the War Memorial has a page. If you go to
Mhm.
the War Memorial's website, go to the Patriotic tab, there's a Heroes Project place. And then you can get all the information off this project as well as my email address. And then you can reach out to me if you knew any of these people. And then I'll start writing the stories and pulling photographs together. I've already identified family members through various other aspects of research. So I'm hoping to get in touch with some of them. And then I just continue to build out the list for the city of Detroit, and hopefully we can find a similar project like this for the city, and put something together for a much, obviously much bigger book or
The longer timeline would be
series of books.
good,
Yes, a
yeah.
timeline that would go probably from one end of the city.
But this isn't all you do. What else do you do, and what else do you want
Yeah.
listeners to know about you?
I am a writer by trade. I love storytelling. I love writing. That's my profession as well as my hobby. So I have my own communications firm where I do storytelling projects with clients of all different industries. That could be anything from corporate history books. I recently just finished two corporate history books. One for a 101-year-old plant and agricultural company in Alabama, and then one for a 45-year-old fireplace distributor in New York State. So it could be as big as that. Speech writing, I do a lot of speech writing, ghost writing, working on a couple of ghost written projects for some business leaders as well. So pretty much writing, researching, and talking to people is like a huge chunk of my life.
Oh
So.
my goodness, you sound incredibly busy. How do people find you then? What's your website?
My website, personally is lisalarkcommunications.com. And I know there's contact information on the War Memorial site as well. But pretty much if you Google my name, you will find either one of the projects that I've had in the past, or you'll find a way to contact me. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook, and just reach out and connect. And as I worked with you as well, always willing to talk to people about finding their family members' records, or learning more about their loved ones' military service, or family histories as well. I've got a pretty tight skill set on how to find information that's been in older newspapers, and so I'm more than willing to work with families, individuals, other groups to help them do something similar to this as
I
well.
mean, it is such a beautiful gift that you're giving to people. Thank you because you do handle it with respect and dignity.
It is. It's like I said, I was raised by a Marine, so I have a level of respect that was brought in by childhood. But I grew up. My mom lost a dear friend from high school in Vietnam, and so I remember going to the wall in D.C. and visiting Chuck, and learning about how he, who he was as a person, and that just was the genesis of it, and
Absolutely. That
just growing from
inspires
there.
you. Right. Thank you.
You're
Thank you for
welcome.
the work
Thank you
that
so
you
much for
do.
having me. I'm very excited to pull this together for you, and in addition to the book, have those resources available for the students in the community. And if they take a trip, I don't know if your schools here in the community go to Washington D.C. at all, as part of their learning projects. But with this information, you'll be able to look up Grosse Pointers on the wall, or
Mhm.
at Arlington. There's several Grosse Pointers buried at Arlington National Cemetery. So people from the community who travel, or even those who go to Europe and maybe visit Normandy or one of
Mhm.
the American cemeteries in France, these people are there.
Yeah.
And to me, it's just so much more powerful to pay respect to someone in your community rather than sort of an abstract.
Such an honor.
Mhm.
Such an honor. Thank you,
Thank you
Lisa.
so much,
Thank
Maria.
you
It was
so much. It
wonderful to,
was
to
great.
talk about this, and I'm excited to get this done for you, and share it
All
with the
right.
city.
All right. We're going to do it. And thank you. And for anyone interested, we'll post some of this information hopefully on our link. I would think we will have all the info that you need. And for more information on all the things we do here at the War Memorial, please visit us at warmemorial.org. If you like this program, subscribe to us, click on the links, and give us a thumbs up. And thank you so much for tuning in. Have a wonderful, wonderful time.